Hi, everyone. So, following up on the recent video in which I mentioned the use of these anticholinergics, such as, over-the-counter substances that contain diphenhydramine, doxylamine succinate, and a number of other things. Yes, the people that pointed to Neptune, good call. That's exactly what it is. What I remember is when I ran into that particular video that day, the moon was in Pisces, and I immediately made the connection, including Neptune's association to Pisces. But all of this is Pisces as the 12th house, Neptune as the co-ruler, and then the other influence would be Jupiter, and the Jupiter is the overarching connector to that sign slash house as well. If you think about what is happening, is that it's an attempt to bring in relaxation, relief, comfort. That's Jupiter's primordial power. You find yourself in what you could describe in psychological terms as a prosperous state, which externally is when people are materially successful, but internally it just means feeling good, feeling relaxed, feeling open. And that's what these things promote, including the sense that when you're sleeping, that's where you go. In many spiritual traditions, they talk about how sleep is when you're literally back at the source. Your ego disappears, true nature is contacted, and there's a sense in which one's spirituality is the attempt to link that state and bring it into consciousness in some way. And this is like a bypass that is being used through these substances. And the problem, as I was saying, is that once you start realizing that you're getting a short term solution, but then at the expense of long term problems such as increased chances of dementia, Alzheimer's, and just overall, don't think it's good for the nervous system, plain and simple. I think a lot of these pharmaceutical products used judiciously can be extremely useful. I mean, if you're in the Middle Ages, you couldn't take Advil or Tylenol because your head hurt. But that doesn't mean that now that you're in the modern ages, you just keep using it every single day. That should be a signal of something you shouldn't do because it's not a good idea. This is where, again, to be careful in that you'll get an ad on TV or wherever, and the solution for you have a pain in your knee, just, yeah, take Advil. And the implication is it's great. And by the way, a substance like that, it appears to be working really well. It takes your pain away, works really well. But I remember asking my doctor, I'm not kidding you, this is like 20 years ago, because I had looked into it. And in the case of Advil, eventually, if you keep using it, the non-steroidal, I think they're called non-steroid anti-inflammatories, those can lead to cardiac problems, heart problems later. They take a while. My doctor's explanation was, at the time I was in sports, and he was saying, no, if you have an injury, anti-inflammatory, even something for 2 or 3 months would be okay. But if you persist, then it can take you down that road where you then become part of those statistics. And then it could be, therefore, a much bigger problem. So you want to avoid that. In the short term, in the case of those things, you run into, because they thin the lining of the stomach, you would have heartburn. So that would also be another warning as well. And this happens a lot with a lot of these substances. Anyway, I'll stop there, but just to say that the connector to the astrology is through Jupiter, but in this case, especially more pointedly, Neptune and the 12th sign in Pisces. If you think about the specificity of Neptune, it would be that all of this modern medicine, including drugs, they are post the discovery of Neptune, which happened in 1843, I believe is when it was. That's when you start getting, for instance, anesthetics and drugs coming to the foreground. Prior to that, they were very scarce. But in terms of the effect of that relaxation pattern, the Jupiter does hold primary rulership over the 12th. You look at a chart, natural chart, Aries rising, Sagittarius is Jupiter, so is Pisces. So that's why you would assign that domain. And it's kind of the logic that you are, in the words of an astrologer I remember who was teaching me in my first year, this woman who said, if you want to understand Jupiter and Saturn, Saturn with the cross above the crescent, first you pay, then you get the goodies. Jupiter is first you get the goodies, then you pay. So you're putting immediate comfort, immediate anything ahead of long-term consequences, which therefore isn't a good idea. All of this fits into the paradigm of proactive astrology from the vantage point that it's how I understand charts. It's the idea that the chart is a map of your life potential. What you do with those planets, your skill in expressing the planets better and better changes your fate. Now, of course, this in a sense is a complete unknown because someone could counter my argument by saying, well, how do you know that no matter what you do, your life would have turned out in the same way? Well, of course, but then by that logic, no one would do anything. So, for instance, you'd say, well, I want to be a doctor, but I'm not going to go to school to be a doctor. That's how it tends to, your will, your participation, your work, Saturn, is what leads to the Jupiter success, the expansion that results from the work. This applies to any planet. So in the case of take Neptune, Neptune's highest expression is the most spiritual energy in the chart. If you're going there to connect with your tranquil energy, the energy of deep, deep connection, what in Buddhism they call equanimity, deep tranquility, profound peace, you're expressing the Neptune perfectly. But that starts to descend from that point, and the energy is less and less pure. By the time you're using some substance to achieve that effect, you're getting into risky territory, and you can keep descending further and further until you, for example, could be a raging alcoholic and or all the con men and deceivers, liars, counterfeiters, scam artists. That's the Neptunian realm as well. And this is where everyone has to figure out how the range works, and everyone has to, in my opinion, move to the top end as much as possible in order to ensure a better and better outcome.